So I've run into some cases, and there may be no solution for this at the time. So that's totally acceptable. I've run into cases where, for example, the JIT cannot see things. So, for example, and this actually is really painful because like it works locally because Tailwind is the post-processing pipeline locally on my dev server, but when I deploy it doesn't. And what I'm talking about is like lazy loaded components. So like when I say I have a dropdown and I click the dropdown and I trigger a popover, but this popover is only loaded when I click the dropdown. And the popover contains HTML with some class names. So on a local development server, when the popover opens, if I hit save or something, then I recompute the style sheet. Tailwind does the thing. It generates some style sheets. I get it. But when I deploy this to the cloud, that dev server refresh doesn't happen. And that popover never triggers the JIT for Tailwind to then create the styles. And then I end up with like a big unstyled popover in production. Have you experienced this? Have people experienced this? What's the best practice to fix this?
Yeah, there is a solution, and that is you can add the class, since you already know what classes those are, you can add all those classes in, I forgot, it's not safe list, it's something else. I haven't used it recently, so I don't remember, but definitely you can pre-add them. Like you can say that you might not be able to find these styles in any of my files, but I need these classes. You can put them in the config. .js. So those utility classes are included by default, whether you have them in your files or not. So then it'll work.
That's so cool.
I will get back to you on what that key is. Yeah, in the config file.
A lot of folks talk about the safe list as being like file paths, but I didn't realize you could just do it for class names. That really solves everything.
Yeah, it's not the safe list. It's something else. I'm just confusing. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. What are some problems you've experienced? It sounds like you've done some consulting, right? What are some problems you've seen with very large scale? I'm talking like enterprise, like big Tailwind projects that maybe the average developer may not be exposed to. And of course, how do you solve them?
Yeah, one thing is not using enough components. So then people end up reusing the styles. They don't make sure to extract components. And then they end up with very large, unreadable HTML, right? And at that point, it's even possible to end up with inconsistent styling because, you have a link in many places or a button or anything. And since you don't have class names now, you can add your own class names. The developer ends up adding a different shade of gray maybe, or a different color, something like that. And also another thing is if you don't want your developers to accidentally use a particular color, which is already there in Tailwind, you must make sure to, override the existing theme and include only the colors that you actually need. Or it's not just colors, even the shadows or, the rounded corners and those things. Tailwind is opinionated. It thinks that, the shadows have to be like that. And it's very easy for, people developing maybe not user-facing modules, maybe admin dashboards or something. It's very easy to simply add a shadow. But if that's not what your design system has, or if that's not how other pages are, things like that, you should add your own stuff to the config and then disable the defaults, basically override them so that there are no inconsistencies, and extract smaller components, again, for consistency and readability and so much more.
Excellent. You mentioned, you bring up a really good point about this, specifically your use of the word consistency and inconsistency, because up until the JIT phase or the just-in-time compiler, I feel like things were more consistent. I've worked with some teams, very large projects, and because of the just-in-time compiler, I see a lot more square brackets and a lot more like outside of config color palette colors, a lot more custom shadows, a lot more. And I feel like this is really abusing the JIT, right? Yeah. Because you're also then at that point just generating like custom CSS per component. What are some ways, first of all, have you experienced this? And second of all, what's the best practice to not do that? Is there a way to, for example, say, you know what, the JIT is just not allowed anymore for this reason or something like that?
Like it's just like giving a knife, right? You probably gave the knife to chop the vegetables, but they ended up stabbing themselves. So, it's like you're giving the power, but there's nothing you can do about it. You can't say, make the knife blunt when it's pointed towards yourself or something like that. It's something that the companies will have to enforce rules, and you're going to use JIT only when it's a one-off thing, literally a one-off thing. If you're using it even twice somewhere, if you're using the same thing the second time, probably you might really want to put it in your style sheet or your config, mainly your config.
Interesting.
Yeah, it should be a one-off thing. So, then it's okay to use it. It's totally okay to use those colors, because let's say you have this Twitter icon just once, or X, yeah, whatever. Okay, sorry, I'll use LinkedIn as the example maybe. This LinkedIn color, you don't have to have that in your config. It doesn't make sense, right? But that icon has to have that color. So then totally use the JIT, use the arbitrary values.
I have an idea now for Tailwind, and this may be my open source contribution. It may be a listener's open source contribution. It may actually be done already and no one's contribution other than the core team. But I had this idea listening to you. Since the JIT reads every class name, right? It could detect duplicate custom class names, literally like duplicates within the square brackets. It'd be like, hey, this hex code is like appearing more than once, maybe, and then give you like a warning in the console, like maybe consider putting this in Tailwind config. Ooh, does that exist? Is this something I could do or some listener could do?
Yeah, I'm not aware of such a tool. It's not existing anywhere. So yeah, you can. Warning, this arbitrary values has been used more than 5 times. That's great.
Yeah, and then you can even, like in the Tailwind config, be like, like TypeScript gives you like strictness. You could be like, after how many occurrences of the same arbitrary value do you want a warning? And then you can even turn it off. Wow. This is why I love open source. I'm literally like, if I get some time off, I'm going to go I'm going to propose the change and we'll see how it goes.